You're listening to the Breakthrough Investor in Commercial Real Estate Podcast. Brought to you by MVP Equity Group, where we learn from private equity experts, their mindset, and ways to achieve financial independence. Here to challenge you to think outside the box is your host, Ernest Peralta.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Ernest Peralta here again. And with us today, we have a very special guest. His name is Paul Levine. Paul, thanks for joining.
My pleasure, Ernest. It's fun to do this.
Awesome. Well, glad that you're here today. And I'm really excited to ask you some questions as it relates to some of the tax advantages that a lot of us investors really want to learn more about. So a little bit about Paul. He has a wealth of experience, by the way. He spent over 50 years practicing as a certified public accountant before becoming a commercial realtor, specializing in multifamily housing and self-storage facilities. He was an associate professor of accounting at California State University. Paul specializes in giving seminars on commercial real estate and taxes as it pertains to real estate groups all across the United States. Topics range anywhere from Section 1031 exchanges to cost allocation surveys and bonus depreciation and other tax advantages to help commercial real estate investors. And he currently resides out of Southern California as we speak. So with that being said, Paul, could you tell our listeners, if I just happen to miss anything, would love for you to tell a little bit more about your backstory. Where did you start and where are you now?
Well, missed anything? Wait. I may be located in Southern California, but we build self-storage facilities and multifamily housing all over the United States. My background as a CPA included the fact that I was instrumental in selling two of my accounting clients to public companies, one of them being this small company in Delaware by the name of Dupont. It was fun sitting across the table from four attorneys from Dupont with me and my client on the other side of the table. I also help my clients as a CPA buy, sell, and finance commercial real estate. So I have not been just doing real estate as a realtor or as a developer, which is what I am now. I've been doing it for many, many years. I also audited mortgage companies, so I know financing inside and out. I was a forensic accountant. I valued businesses. I was involved in the settlements, and I was an expert witness as well. I had 10 no change IRS audits in a row, which means the IRS will not come back for 3 years and audit that area. Gives a lot of cold comfort to my clients. I was involved in the way that the IRS viewed a certain Section 1031 transaction, and I was very proud of that.
I know I only touched the surface on your background, so thank you so much for explaining that. Again, this is exciting because you have a lot of experience that we can talk about, and I'd love for you to kind of expound on that during our conversation. So with that said, I know we were talking offline before this podcast, and because of your background and experience, I would love to dive deeper into like the tax advantages for some of these either new rules or limitations for depreciation and expenses as it pertains to multifamily commercial properties. And so we were talking a little bit earlier on, you mentioned a couple of things, and I would love for you to either talk about them in detail and maybe step us through some examples. You had mentioned like bonus depreciation and how that applies to rental properties. Can you explain to our listeners what is bonus depreciation and how do you qualify for something like that?
Well, let me just say that the bonus depreciation not only works for multifamily housing, but it also works for self-storage facilities. And bonus depreciation is depreciation taken on, and these are three very important words, tangible personal property. You cannot take it on real estate. A self-storage building or facility made by brick and mortar has to be depreciated over 39 years straight line, the same amount every year. Multifamily housing has to be depreciated over 27 and a half years, straight line, the same amount every year. But tangible personal property, you can use accelerated depreciation. Now, the current rules for bonus depreciation are that you can take bonus depreciation up to a limit of $1 million, one hell of a number. That will create what is known as a net operating loss. That net operating loss can be carried forward because it's going to zero out this year's taxes with a lot left over. So you can carry that a lot left over into the next year and the next year and the next year. And I'm glad this is on a video. You won't have to pay taxes until your hair is as gray as mine instead of as black as yours. But the bonus depreciation limit of $1 million is only good till 12/31/22. That's when that law expires. And with what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, we have absolutely no clue what's going to happen to it because Congress does not work and play well with others, and we have no idea what they're going to do. The first fallback situation will be to the old limit, which was $500,000. Still, not a bad way to go. And then if they take that away from us, we can use accelerated depreciation versus straight line depreciation. And we don't have to have a 39 or a 27 and a half year life. You can have a 10 or a 15-year life for the tangible personal property. Now let's talk about apartment buildings first. What is tangible personal property? It's the cabinets, it's the appliances, it's the doors, it's the pop-out windows, it's everything that you can take away from the structure without destroying the structure itself. Self-storage facilities, my company builds them in such a way that you can take them apart like an old erector set. You're probably too young to remember erector sets, but they came with these pieces of metal about this long with little holes in them, and they gave you little screws and nuts in order to create little structures. Well, we create big structures with them, up to 3, 4, 5 stories tall, and as long as you can take them apart into tangible personal property, you can depreciate that tangible property, number one, as bonus depreciation, and number two, if that doesn't work for you, as accelerated depreciation with a much shorter useful life, giving you a lot of depreciation. I said the limit for bonus depreciation was $1 million. But if you take $1 million of tangible personal property and depreciate it under what's known as the double declining balance method, which is accelerated over a period of 10 years, after 5 years, you've got over $600,000 of depreciation. That in and of itself is going to create a net operating loss for you that you can carry forward and also not pay any tax.
Okay. I've also heard Section 179. That one also lets business owners deduct a set amount of new business assets. How does that compare to bonus depreciation? Is there one advantage over the other, or should they even consider that at all?
Well, I've been, now, number one, you got to realize something, and I must put this caveat out there. I am a retired CPA. I was an active CPA for over 50 years. I know all of it. I still take continuing education classes in taxes to keep up with everything because no other realtor or real estate developer does. So it sets me apart from the others. Section 179 depreciation was very popular for many, many years. And the limits changed every few years. And what Section 179 gave you is you were able to choose certain assets and take write off the entire amount up to certain limits in 1 year. Bonus depreciation took that limit and made it higher.
Okay.
And it gave you a lot more benefit. It's just a better tool for the tool belt.
Got it. Okay, that's the distinction. It actually just capitalized on the Section 179 to increase the amount that you could depreciate. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And you had mentioned something else too as well. Another tax advantage is this cost segregation study. Can you explain that a little bit more to us?
Well, I sort of mentioned it when I talked about the fact that in apartment buildings, you can take depreciation on the appliances, the cabinets, the pop-out windows, the doors, the ceiling fans, etc. Because what you do is you go out and hire a cost segregation company, and they come in and they will tell you the cost or the value of those particular items that are, again, tangible personal property subject to bonus depreciation. Now, I happen to build these buildings. So we know when we build them how much the cabinets cost, how much the appliances cost, how much the pop-out windows cost, and so on. So I don't necessarily need a cost segregation company to come in to tell me what it is, because I have more knowledge than they do. And the interesting thing is you want to do a cost segregation study, not only at the beginning when you build or buy the building, but you want to do it at the end as well. And the reason for that is, and let's use as an example, a dishwasher that costs $450. When you build the building, you have a $450 asset that's tangible personal property that you could write off up to $1 million. But when you sell the building, if you sell it before 10 years, you have to have what's known as depreciation recapture, which comes back as ordinary income, and ordinary income is taxed at a higher rate than capital gains. So you buy it at $450, but what's a dishwasher worth after 10 years? A used dishwasher, not a lot. And I even take a more aggressive approach with the IRS because they sort of have a list to tell you what number you should use. But if you are familiar with income taxes and you give contributions other than cash, okay, you give property, and say you give them a used dishwasher, what I do is I call the Goodwill store and I will find out how much they will charge me for a 10-year-old dishwasher. And that's the number that I use. Because at the beginning, I want the number high to get a lot of depreciation, but at the end, I want the number very low in order to not have depreciation recapture and ordinary income and pay taxes at a higher rate.
So with any renovations or maybe shortly after purchasing a property, should they, with any type of renovations to get the maximum amount of tax benefits, should they do that? I think you mentioned at the beginning and then at the end, right?
Yes, without
Okay.
a doubt. You do it both times.
Okay.
And you do it very shortly after buying the building, even if you can put in escrow that, and I don't know, different states do property exchanges different ways. Here in California, we have escrows. And if you can put in the escrow instruction that you can have the cost segregation study done before escrow closes, then you have in the contract an agreed upon third-party acknowledgement of what the tangible personal property is. And that's a wonderful tool to be able to show the IRS. It's a contractual number.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And how much, or ideally, how much do you think the range or cost would it be to do a segregation study? Could you give us a range?
Well, depending upon the size of the buildings, they're not inexpensive, but what you get back is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about 8, 10, 12, $15,000 or more, depending upon the size of the apartment building. We really don't need it, like I said, if we build a building for you. And you really don't need it if we're talking about self-storage, because in self-storage, if you buy an existing facility, you're talking about the garage doors and the security system and not much more. But the way we build it, we're talking about the walls and the sides and everything else, in addition to the garage door. We'll give you up to 90% of the cost of building the building as tangible personal property. And if the IRS ever questions that, I would have an agent come out and I would literally disassemble the last 2 or 3 units in front of them and show them that it is tangible personal property. Remember, I had 10 no change audits in a row. I have no problem dealing with the IRS.
So I've got a question for you. Actually, this had come to me last week. So the question then is, he's going to do a 1031 exchange and he's going to reinvest that money to buy an apartment building in an opportunity zone. And his understanding is that if he holds this apartment building for 10 years and decides to sell it after 10 years, that he will not pay any capital gains taxes. Is that correct?
That's my knowledge as well.
Okay. Okay. And
the opportunity zone is a wonderful tool, and it was designed originally to help neighborhoods that needed business to go in there in order to create a better economy for the neighborhood. But it turned out that there are opportunity zones in Beverly Hills.
Who would have thought? Who would have knew, right? Okay, so knowing that that's a good strategy, is there anything else that maybe somebody that's in a similar situation should consider or be aware of from a tax perspective?
Well, when you sell a property, you are looking for that capital gain. The 1031 exchange has some real restrictions in that you have to define the property that you're going after within 45 days of the sale of the first property, and you have to complete the exchange within 180 days of that transaction selling the original property. And that sometimes creates a problem. I have a quick story for you. My best friend sold a piece of property, a vacation home in a city called Idlewild, California. And he then purchased a property, a single family residence in Henderson, Nevada. The money was put with what is known as a facilitator. And he made the offer and it was accepted on a Sunday, and Monday his agent in Nevada called up the facilitator to transfer the $131,000 to the escrow for the new property. Guess what? The facilitator went bankrupt that morning. So I had to report the entire gain, and I had to take a casualty loss of $131,000. That is not the best thing to do on a tax return. But the next year he got a check from the trustee in bankruptcy. So I went back and amended the original return and reduced the amount of the casualty loss. And the next year he got another check, and I did the same thing. By the way, I don't charge my best friend to do his tax return. So I'm doing all of this gratis. And the third year he got another check, and I looked at it and I said, this is not a Section 1031 exchange. This is an installment sale, which means that you pick up the gross profit as a capital gain. Every year you get money based on how much money you get. And I went back and I amended all of those tax returns. And 30 days later, the IRS came out with an announcement saying, in this specific case, to treat the transaction as an installment sale. I loved it. I basically created the law.
I bet your good friend was really excited about that. Every year you'd help him with that.
Oh, we did a lot more fun things than that.
I know that you had mentioned that you're also into self-storage. You've built a more recent project. You were building a self-storage facility that was pretty exciting. Do you mind talking a little bit about that project?
We're going to be building a self-storage facility in, of all places, South Dakota. We build apartment building and self-storage facilities anywhere in the United States. It's going to be a 60,000 square foot facility, which is a fairly large self-storage facility. It will be 3 stories. And we literally build to suit. The owner, the investor, wants the ground floor to be able to accept RV parking inside. So we're going to have to make the first floor larger than you would normally do. We build to suit. We will build as big or as small a facility as somebody wants, and we will build it as a way that you will get massive bonus depreciation, creating that net operating loss, and you will not pay taxes for a long time. And that is in the event that you invest somewhere about $600,000 to $800,000, and I'm using California land values here in this example, you will get that $1 million of depreciation. But if you invest $2 million or $3 million, or in this case, between 5 and 6 million, you will get a lot more bonus depreciation. It will carry that loss forward, and you will be in very good shape.
That's music to our ears for sure.
Well, everybody hates to pay taxes.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that, either you dread because you don't know how to work around some of the tax deductions, especially finding a good CPA, or it's music to your ears.
Remember that I am thought of, or I was thought of, as a dentist. People hate to go to the dentist. People hated to go to their CPA to do their taxes. That's why, since long time ago, I have a jar of Jelly Bellies I keep on my desk. And I watch the clients because there are different behaviors. Some of them eat the Jelly Bellies like crazy until they know a number, and then they stop. Some of them don't touch them until they know a number, and then they'll start eating them. And I just love to watch them and see the different behaviors from the different people.
That's an interesting way to read people. Just nonverbal cues, right? Just looking at the different
body language is everything.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a couple questions to ask you now, just in terms of your background. I mean, you've done a lot of things. You were a professor, associate professor. You've spent a lot of time as a tax attorney, a real estate commercial broker, real estate investor. I've got to ask you this, like, what mistakes do you think that you've made, or have you made as a new investor? And what did you learn from it?
Well, most people go into real estate investing without really analyzing how much their budget is. And that's a really big problem, because one thing, I like to work with individual investors or small groups of investors who know each other, as opposed to syndications, because you're going to hold on to an apartment building or a self-storage facility for a long time. And during time, people's situations are going to change. If you're dealing with just a sole owner, then you work out the situation for him or her. But if you're talking about a small group of investors who know each other, you want them to support the person who's in a situation, as opposed to having that person have to go out and sell their interest to a stranger, and God knows what he's going to get as a price.
Mhm.
So know your budget and know what you're going to do. And I also used to tell people to go out and first, if you want to invest in real estate, buy a brand new house in the first phase or two of a development, because by the time they're up to phase 4, 5, or 6, their increases are going to give your house or your residence an increase in value as well. And then you could take that additional capital and then invest it in a small apartment building. But now I've come around to think that doing something else might be a better idea, and that is to start off with a duplex. Because in a single family home, if you have a vacancy, you have 100% vacancy factor. In a duplex, at just 2 units, if you have one vacancy, you only have a 50% vacancy factor, and you don't have to pull money out of your pocket as much to pay the mortgage.
That's a good strategy. I would actually opt for that second scenario. That's something that we actually did early on in our investing career. For some reason, it just made more sense for us.
It does. It really
that.
does.
Considering those are some of the mistakes that you've discussed, and I appreciate that. What would be your number one habit for success?
I have an expression and I live by it. I plan, I plan, I plan, I review, and I execute. So that by the time I am into the review or execute stage, I have the knowledge of everything I need at my fingertips, and I know exactly what I'm doing. And you cannot plan enough. These financial advisors say you don't plan to fail, you fail to plan. And I agree with that, but not in the same way that they do it. When I say you plan, you check with your CPA, you check with your financial advisor, you have a team, and you don't do it alone. Now, normally a certified financial planner is going to want to sell you proprietary products from his own portfolio, but get somebody who cares about you. And I can't emphasize that enough. If they care about you, they're going to understand that you need a diversified portfolio and that it is to your benefit to have that in order to restrict any losses you may go through.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Is definitely find somebody that understands your situation and really cares about what your end goal is. You run into those situations where individuals are always trying to either push a certain financial plan or an asset. I totally believe in diversifying your portfolio because you never know what's going to happen, down the road.
And
in terms of the
also in
economy.
finding a commercial realtor or a real estate developer like myself, commercial realtors care about their commission. They got to care about you first. I have an expression that you have to know and understand the client's needs, wants, and desires. And it's my job to fulfill those needs, wants, and desires. And many years ago, I took a class called active listening. And I'll sit with a client for an hour and go, and parrot a few phrases that they say and go, yes, a lot of times. And I did that with one client who wanted to put in years ago $100,000 more in a beautiful home to redo her kitchen. And I used active listening. And at the end of an hour, she looked at me and she goes, "You're right. I'm not going to spend it." I didn't say a word.
She answered her own question.
But I just let her come to her conclusion.
Sometimes that's the best thing you can do. Just let your clients speak 80% of the time and you communicate 20% of the time.
Well, I want them to come up with great ideas that I may have put a seed in their mind for and think it was theirs.
Yeah. And that's the best scenarios when they can actually answer it themselves and come up with their own synopsis.
And they're going to be behind it a lot
Yeah.
more than if it was my idea.
Yep. Correct. So, you're working on a few things. And again, I know that you are still entwined with a lot of the tax laws and things like that. What trends do you foresee now that we're hitting the middle of this year into next year?
We're not hitting the middle of this year. We're hitting the end of a pandemic. And you can't consider what's going on now like you could before the pandemic or in normalcy. What's going to happen when the rental assistance or the stoppage of evictions comes? The one thing I do see is a lot of people have used up a lot of their savings through the pandemic. And if they wanted to buy a house now, the down payment just isn't there like it was at the beginning of the pandemic. But they may be going back to jobs that are paying them a lot of money, and they want to live a certain lifestyle in a certain place. And out here, and I love to consider what goes on in California, you get a really nice 2 or 3 bedroom apartment that's 1,700 square feet, that has some nice amenities like a washer and dryer in the unit and maybe a refrigerator. And the amount of the rent they're going to pay is somewhere around $6,000. People have single family homes and they are converting their garages 600 or 900 square feet into 1, 2, or 3 bedroom apartments. And catch this, they're getting $2,000 a month. So people, and one of the things that I know you're going to get to is what is a thought process out there that everybody believes in that is wrong, or that I think is wrong. And that is that investing in California happens to be a really good idea because yes, the land is expensive, but so are the rents. And an expression I use as an accountant, God knows how many times, is it pencils out. You're going to make money. Now, there are some ridiculous things. An apartment building or a piece of commercial real estate is valued by what's known as the cap rate. Mm-hmm. You take the amount of cash flow and divide it by the cap rate, and a normal cap rate out here is between 4 and 6%. So say, for argument's sake, it's 5%. 5% happens to be 1/20th of 100. You take the net operating income, multiply it 20 times, and that's the price of the building. I saw one in Beverly Hills where the cap rate was 1%. That means that you had to take the net operating income and multiply it by 100. That's ludicrous.
Yep.
But, they got something close to that.
Wow. So I've got a question for you. Yeah, we've looked at investing in California. I mean, when it comes to location and considering the cap rates now in California are kind of equal to even some of the hot spots that are trending right now for people that want to invest. What about the
rent control?
Right.
Rent control, first of all, it's not everywhere. And second of all, there are enough rules in rent control that if somebody moves out, when a new person moves in, you can adjust the rents to market. So yes, there are buildings that are heavily rent controlled and that will adjust the net operating income and will adjust the cap rate, and that building will not go for as much money as a building in an area without rent control. But laws change, neighborhoods change, and the one constant in life is change. So you don't hold on to an apartment building for 2 years unless you're main objective was to get it, fill it up, and flip it. You hold on to it, and it's multi-generational. You're going to pass it on to your children and your grandchildren, most likely. And so you plan on normalcy, knowing that change will come. You have this year's laws to deal with, and you just have to, make decisions based on that. By the way, there's something I want to go back to talking about normalcy. Our president, Joe Biden, is not a big fan of Section 1031 exchanges, and we talked about 1031 exchanges earlier. He wants to do away with them, but what he has proposed in different areas is a certain cap where the middle class will benefit, and then a higher tax or no benefit for the highest, wealthiest people. So I think Section 1031 exchanges will stay around in some way, shape, or form. And the main reason I think that is because half of Congress is probably in the middle of a 1031 exchange right now, and they don't want to cut their own throats.
Yeah, good point. It'd be interesting to see what'll happen here.
Yeah, he also wants to do away with the step up in basis upon your death when you pass the assets on. And again, his proposal is it's okay for a certain number, but it's not okay if it's extremely high.
Only time will tell. Let's see what happens here if that goes through.
That will be interesting.
Yeah, it will. So another question I wanted to ask you is, what's one common myth about real estate investing that you would like to debunk?
I watched a podcast the other day, and it was given by someone who has a great reputation in commercial real estate, mainly apartment buildings. And he, part of his presentation was an Excel spreadsheet, and you had to look at this percentage and the growth, population growth in the area, and then the crime rate in the area, and all sorts of different things, and everything had to work out. I'm a touchy-feely guy. If a client wants to build or buy in a neighborhood, I don't care where in the United States that is, but I'll go there for a few days. I'll walk the neighborhood. I'll ask people how the neighborhood has changed over the years. I happen to have been years ago the accountant for the Long Beach Police Officers Association. And believe me, when I tell an officer that, it's like an instant connection. So I would even go talk to the police and ask them about the crime rate in the area. Because in building multifamily housing, I happen to believe that one very nice feature you can add is a ground floor retail section with different stores there. So I want to know the walking index. I do want to know certain percentages, but the walking index, the change in the neighborhood, what they foresee. I will go to the planning commission and find out what else is going up in the area. One thing about the comment I made about Henderson, Nevada, I was there visiting my best friend after the coronavirus, and we were all vaccinated and it was safe. And in the year that I wasn't there, they built 3 self-storage facilities, and the area was all single family homes. And before that, my thought was you need apartment buildings to sustain self-storage facilities, but you don't, because people have, and I always put it in quotes, stuff. And that stuff they don't want to get rid of. And that stuff that even if they have a single family residence, they need a self-storage facility in order to keep that and keep it in good shape. You have climate control, you have all sorts of good things. You put blankets over them. You make sure that the articles of furniture that your great grandmother had stay in good shape.
It's interesting that you say that about storage facilities. One thing about COVID too that I noticed is that there were a lot of people either consolidating or just putting stuff away. And it looks like the self-storage facilities asset class seemed to have increased in business during COVID.
During the coronavirus, that is the only industry I know of that has grown and grown and grown. I mean, 3 self-storage facilities in Henderson, Nevada during the coronavirus. It's happening all over the country. I
Yeah.
mean, Austin, Texas is another city. That's just half of California is moving to Austin, Texas, because a lot of the big companies in the Silicon Valley are moving to Austin, Texas. And the employees are following. They need their jobs. And Austin, Texas is a great place both for multifamily housing and for self-storage facilities right now.
Texas in general is just a hot market. It looks like a lot of folks are migrating over to the Sun Belt states, some
I
towards
was
the
just going to say the
Southwest.
whole Sun Belt. You're talking about Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. I'm going to Georgia in a few weeks. An associate, a CPA who is well known for his real estate knowledge, is giving a talk, and I'm going with him because we've sort of partnered up. And we will spend a few days there talking to commercial realtors, seeing the self-storage facilities and checking out the neighborhoods, because that's one of the big areas that's going to be a self-storage haven in the future.
It'd be nice to continue our conversations too, and to see how it continues to grow, especially, this piece of your portfolio in the self-storage.
Well, I would love to come back anytime you would have me.
Ah, great. That's great. We're going to have you in a future podcast again. So a couple more questions I wanted to ask you. How do you give back to the community?
We don't build apartment buildings or self-storage just to make money. You build so that people can live in a good area, a safe area, in a community, as opposed to an apartment building. You build the self-storage facilities so these people can store these legacies they have from generations before them. And you also get involved in certain charities that benefit that neighborhood. I'm not into for this purpose only, but I'm not only into the state or the city. I like to bring it down to the neighborhood, because those are the people that you're dealing with, and those are the people you have to satisfy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you take it right down to the root, to the ground level, because that's what's going to build the community, are the people. So
Yeah, and I grew up in an area in New York where there were about 35 apartment buildings with about 80 some odd apartments per building. And it was a neighborhood. We knew everybody. As a kid, I went downstairs and there was always a whole bunch of guys to play. And this is a New York thing, stickball, in the streets. You smile, but Willie Mays played same stickball game that I did.
memories come to mind too when I see old movies. I remember stickball in the streets of New York, old towns like Little Italy. And
Well, I was in that street playing stickball.
where can our listeners learn and connect with you?
Well, my email address is plevinerealtor@gmail.com. And my telephone number is 818-298-4000. A nice, easy telephone number to remember. Unfortunately, Pizza Hut had it before I did, and I used to get calls all the time for Pizza Hut. If you can call me 7 days a week, but just do me a favor. Every morning, I write an article, except on the weekends, that I put on my Paul Levine Realtor page. And I talk about self-storage facilities, bonus depreciation, cost segregation studies, all of the stuff that we've talked about today. And I get somewhat technical in some articles, and I also try to entertain as well as engage my audience. I have over 700 followers So if you want to learn more about this and learn it on a regular basis, read my articles. That's Paul Levine Realtor on Facebook. I also put it on LinkedIn. And then, like I said, you can call me anytime after 10 a.m. Pacific time, because I get up very early to write my articles, to answer my emails, to do some administrative stuff. And then by 10 o'clock, I'm ready.
You have such a regimented program, and I totally commend you for your thoroughness. I actually did, go through your blogs and read through it. For those of you that want to check out Paul's blog, it's very detailed, it's very thorough, as you can imagine during our conversations here, but he goes into more in depth on those things and those different topics. So I would highly recommend you take a look at his blog, his article posts, and his website as well.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course, absolutely. And one thing is kind of our signature question, if you will, Paul. It's something that we ask all of our guests. What can our listeners do to kind of take that next step towards what they want to accomplish? So the question then is, what actual advice have you learned is the most important that a new investor should do towards their next step to achieve their goals?
Well, I don't want any investor to go in and buy a piece of real estate, a piece of income property, that if things don't go exactly according to plan, puts them in a really bad financial situation, because you want a positive situation to build on. And if you get into a negative situation, it can hurt you in so many different ways. So know yourself, work out a budget. Figure what your goals are. When I work with a client, we always work out a 5-year plan, and every year we change that 5-year plan because their circumstances change, their kids get older. One of my dear friends who owns the best sushi bar this side of Tokyo, one of his kids started Northwestern University last year, and his other kid is going to NYU, New York University, starting this coming year. And his circumstances have totally changed. You've got to look at your life and what your goals are. And there is one thing that I live by, and I heard back in 1968. Bobby Kennedy was one of my great heroes. And Bobby Kennedy said something that I have used my whole life since 1968. And that's when I graduated from college, by the way. He said, men see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. And what I try and do is work with my clients and determine their dreams and work with them to achieve them.
Those are very good quotes to live by, for sure. And I'll just take a mental note. I'll take a note of that too, as well. Something that I'll have to take a look at every once in a while.
There was one other quote, and I don't know who said it, but I loved it. First, they asked you what you were doing, and then they asked you how you did it.
Yeah, that's another good one too. Well, Paul, it was such a pleasure having you on our show, and just sharing your wealth of knowledge and your experience in taxes and just your breadth and depth of expertise in general. So, it was very helpful for me, and I'm sure it was very helpful for our listeners as well. We'll definitely have you as a guest again on our future podcast.
I look forward to it. This was a pleasure for me. Your questions were right on. I am sure that your listeners got a lot out of this. I hope that I contributed to that, but it's a learning process. The one thing that I would just like to give as a caveat is they saw my opinions today. Seek others as well and make your own decision.
There you go. Words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Paul. All right, everyone. Until the next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Breakthrough Investor in Commercial Real Estate podcast. If you like what you heard and you found value in this episode, we would really appreciate if you would give us a rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. For those of you that are interested in investing passively in these types of deals in solid cash flowing commercial real estate throughout Arizona and Texas, as well as Idaho and Colorado, then visit us at mvpequitygroup.com. Fill out the investor interest form. That's mvpequitygroup.com. If you close on a multifamily deal or any other type of commercial property in the past 12 months and you want to be on this podcast, then send us an email on our Contact Us page for details. Thanks.